Check. 1, 2, 1, 2. No. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. Got just static. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Check. 1, 2. Nothing. It's just static. Yeah, I'm going out. Yeah, this is the correct one. So it's output 1. Let me get my man. Check.
Is it in one still? What about check? There we go.
Check, check, 1, 2.
Next to me. Where's it point at?
I'm gonna actually grab the mic. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, check. Check, check, 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check. Good. Coming down, check, check. No. Way to sort it. Check. Check, check, 1, 2. No. Check, check. No. Same thing. No, I didn't do anything to it. Yeah, it's a gate. There's a gate on it. There's a gate on it. Yep. Yeah, 'cause 2, 1, 2. Check, check. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, it was working perfectly yesterday.
Test 1, 2, nothing. Test 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Too hot? Hold on. I can. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Test, test, test. Test, test. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Good.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started here in just in 2 minutes. Welcome, everyone. Hello, Roselyn. Welcome to our panel. Thrilled to have you, and I am really delighted to be joined by this distinguished panel. And it is fantastic to see so many friends here in the audience and new faces. So really excited. So a few logistical notes before we get started. First, we will have a few interventions not in English. So please use the headsets. The channels are 3 for English, 1 for Spanish, and 2 for Portuguese. And please do try to speak slowly for the interpreters. We know this is a critical moment for nature. We also know there is no pathway to the goals of the Paris Agreement without reversing deforestation. So this is why we've created the Leaf Coalition in recognition of the need for collective action. There's what I've sometimes said, there's no single government agency, no philanthropy, no corporate that can solve this challenge alone. We need to find solutions that work for all. And so that's what the focus of this panel is going to be about. How do we create equitable and just transactions that can drive finance to reversing deforestation? Many of us have been talking for the last few years about integrity, and we know integrity is crucial, but it's integrity for all. And so LEAF has been very focused on a high integrity on the standards through the R-Tree standard, but also on creating integrity through our buyer criteria, making sure that emission reductions are being used not to delay climate action, but for residual emissions. So the Emergent team, many of which are here, we have been working very hard over the last year, or 2 years, I should say, driving to first transactions with forest countries. And so we'll hear from some today. And so our hope and expectation is that over the next few months, we'll be in a position to announce some of the first transactions, some of the first deals with the forest countries. Once those agreements are signed, these are legally binding offtake agreements for emission reductions from jurisdictional REDD programs. The challenge then is going to be build on them and grow and scale the market. And so that's going to be our focus next year. So we're absolutely delighted to work with EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, and Mark's here representing EDF to organize this panel today, and bringing together a range of stakeholders that are involved in JREDD transactions, from forest governments to indigenous peoples and local communities, corporate participants in the LEAF Coalition, sovereign donors, funders, and civil society. So I want to thank all of you who've been part of the LEAF Coalition. And even if you haven't, thanks for your support as we work together to protect the forest. So I'm personally really looking forward to the feedback and to this panel discussion today. So we'll go ahead and get into it. So the format is we'll have some intro comments from each of the panelists. I'll pose a few questions. We'll have about 5 minutes from each of the panelists. And then we'll open up for a discussion amongst ourselves. And then we'd like to bring in all of you for a interactive dialogue. And again, the theme here is there is no workable solution if we're doing transactions that don't work for all parties. And so that's what this is about. We need to find a pathway that is truly win-win-win for the forest countries, for the buyers, for civil society, for indigenous peoples, for local communities. And that's what we're trying to do. And I should say, and I'm going to give credit here to Joe, because this conversation we were having earlier, one of the things we're very focused on is, we've heard it before, learning by doing, right? So we know there will be mistakes made, and what we're trying to do very hard is learn from those mistakes, adapt, and fix, right, any mistakes that are made. And so with that, let me introduce our first panelist. Hold on just a second. Roselyn, who many of you know from Ghana, who's the director of the Climate Change Directorate, the Forestry Commission in Ghana, has been, Roselyn, you've been involved with, conversations with Emergent and with the LEAF Coalition for some time. And so I'd like to ask you, so your experience of being involved as a forest government looking to potentially supply JREDD credits, and why and how do you feel LEAF has the potential to drive change on the ground? And what is the impact that you believe it can have for Ghana as well as other forest countries and their peoples?
Thank you very much, Aaron, and good afternoon once again. I'm sure I said good afternoon on my other panel, and some of you were here. So a second good afternoon. Thank you for having Ghana on this panel, and for all the wonderful conversations that have gone on these couple of days. So Ghana's experience through the LEAF process, we would have hoped to have signed an EPA by now. That's the first thing I want to say. Because in Glasgow, the signal that LEAF gave was very strong. It was the game changer. We are going to drive that ambition. We are going to have the transactions. We are going to have the speed of delivery of finance. And so we would have hoped that it's almost 2 years. We would have had an EPA at least last year to showcase what's going on. But once again, it's one thing making a statement and then moving into the real action. And I believe that it's been a learning curve for both the LEAF Coalition itself and also for the supply side. And a number of things that we believe we found challenging when we started, and also to mention, even before I get into the challenges, that we are happy that Emergent has been listening, and also all the partners that are supporting. At least to Ghana, we don't have it 100%, but we are not where we started from after Glasgow. So for example, we've had to grapple with the processes of having like a fragmented process. So trees is a standard on its own. Emergent is working with the LEAF Coalition, that's also on its own. They have their own procedures they are working with. You also have to work on the standard to fulfill the requirements of the standard, have your concept note, get into the trees registration document, start trees monitoring, and then on the Emergent side, you also need to work on the financial intermediary, begin to work on your EPA transactions and negotiations. For a country like Ghana with a long history with the FCPF, this was a bit too fragmented for us, because within the FCPF, all this was put under one bucket, and the World Bank was practically facilitating this for us and giving us support, support that has lasted over 10 years. And would have expected that, I mean, a lot of that support would have discounted that whole process again through the LEAF engagement. But of course, LEAF is not just about the sovereigns. That's one of the questions that I've always been asking. the same sovereigns are in the FCPF process. Why is it new here? But I realized that there are corporates, and with the corporates, things work differently. So we've also had to adjust to understand how the corporates are thinking. And we believe that even with all these different bottlenecks, we've also made a lot of progress. We've received support through the UN REDD process to look at the different sort of pieces of work that we have to do to fulfill the trees standard requirements on safeguards, on MRV, also on stakeholder engagement and benefit sharing. That's amazing. And I, for one, have said on different panels that LEAF is offering $10 per ton of carbon. But it's not really $10 if you decouple the FI payments, the validation and verification payments that the World Bank took care of for us. And now we have EDF coming in to say, well, we can support that process as well. So it tells us that all the different challenges that we started with, at least there is light. We are having these challenges being solved together, and it's good to speak up, because it's one thing to just sit and maybe say that the coalition is not delivering, but if you're not able to speak to Emergent, to speak to the Art Secretariat and nuance some of these challenges and come to a common understanding, you can't really receive the support that's needed. And so these are my initial reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Roselyn. I want to shift now to IP&LC, so Indigenous people and local communities. I'd like to introduce Gustavo Sanchez who is the president of REDD at MOCAF in Mexico, which is representing local communities and smallholder farmers. He is also the secretary to the executive director at AMPB. And Gustavo, to you, what is your perceptions of LEAF from an IP&LC perspective? Why do you feel that LEAF has the potential to drive change and to provide opportunities for local communities, Indigenous peoples? And what opportunities are you hopeful for from the LEAF process?
Gracias, Aaron. Bueno, quisiera comentar que soy de México y represento a una organización que agrupa a pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales que cuidan, administran y en la mayor parte de los casos son dueños de sus tierras y de sus bosques. Es una, digamos, unión poco común que participen pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, pero hemos entendido que si no tenemos una unión entre los dos sectores, los únicos que se benefician son quienes quisieran entrar a los territorios para beneficiarse de sus recursos. Hemos estado participando desde hace más de una década en la construcción de iniciativas REDD. En algunos países los procesos no han concluido, digamos, en una implementación, pero me parece que en todos ha habido un valor agregado. Por ejemplo, en México, a pesar de que no se concluyó la estrategia en REDD, hubo cambios legislativos para fortalecer derechos. En esta nueva etapa, nueva generación de iniciativas REDD en la que estamos, por lo menos a nivel jurisdiccional, me parece que hay muchos aprendizajes, hay que rescatarlos. Antier, me parece, hace un par de días estábamos analizando que en volumen el mercado representa uno de los mayores fuentes de inversión. Entonces, estemos o no de acuerdo con mecanismos de mercado, no podemos darnos el lujo de no dejar de incidir en estos mecanismos, sobre todo quienes representamos comunidades territoriales. Me parece que en ese sentido, LEAF tiene una gran oportunidad de ser, digamos, una de estas fuentes estratégicas de financiamiento. Creo que el solo hecho del lanzamiento de la coalición ha despertado procesos en algunas jurisdicciones que estaban un poco, digamos, detenidos. Entonces se ha levantado una nueva expectativa en muchos gobiernos nacionales y subnacionales. Me parece que una de las cuestiones que hace falta, y hemos estado conversando en diferentes espacios, diferentes foros, es cómo resolvemos el tema de la preparación, tanto en darle un espacio en los procesos como conseguir los recursos para ello. Y no solo se requiere preparar a pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, sino también hay una nueva generación de funcionarios que después de una década no necesariamente tienen la memoria institucional de lo que se construyó y lo que se hizo en años anteriores. Hay algunos que dicen que esto le corresponde al mercado, es decir, a la coalición de compradores. Hay otros que dicen que es una responsabilidad de los gobiernos, otro que probablemente la cooperación internacional puede llenar ese espacio. Nosotros estamos convencidos de que necesitamos tener una coalición entre todas las partes. Los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades locales, como los principales inversores en los territorios, aun cuando no sea un tema monetario, y la empresa privada, los gobiernos de países desarrollados y la cooperación. Entre todos tenemos que entrarle a desarrollar un espacio de preparación, los recursos necesarios para poder desplegar todo el potencial que tiene la coalición LEAF. Gracias.
Thank you, Gustavo. And I think we're going to pick up on some of those themes, especially Mark. Hopefully you'll pick up on some of those themes as well. So moving on now to the sovereign perspective, the donor perspective. I'd like to introduce Joanna Macrae, who's the head of strategy and LEAF at the International Forest Unit from the UK government. UK has been an essential partner in the LEAF coalition. And so, Joe, I'd like to ask you, the title here is Driving Growth in the Market for Jurisdictional REDD Credits. What is your, what is your hope there? How does the UK government think about that? And how does LEAF, fit into that?
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So I think we see LEAF as a really important next step, I suppose, building on a long history of investment in JREDD. And I suppose a kind of an investment in a pillar of what I think will be a really critical part of the green economy over the next 10, 20 years. And critically for us, I think what LEAF is really about is how to define an approach to scaling forest carbon credits in a way that has a lot of integrity on both ends of the transaction. And I think both ends is really key. Because we know that we need to make these markets work, not only to deliver environmental benefits, but also to deliver benefits for forest communities and forest countries. So how we square all of those circles where kind of you're getting those environmental outcomes, those social outcomes, and doing that in a way that is agile is no mean feat. So sort of a huge thanks not only to the Emergent team, but to all of the other colleagues, including Roselyn and her team, who've been at the other end of those transactions, because that's not easy to get all of those benefits lined up. So I guess maybe to build a little bit on what you said, Erin, I think for us, this is really at the forefront of innovation in that new green climate carbon economy. But what's interesting is we've got a lot of the foundational materials to build out from. So we're benefiting from the investment in JREDD that's been done by the UN and forest countries over many years. We're benefiting from a proven methodology in the shape of art trees. So we've got a lot of the grounding on the supply side. And then what we're also building on is some of the demand side integrity pieces. And I think that's what's quite unique here is kind of how we're being able to take all of that work that's been done on both the supply and demand side, and really put those pieces together in a different way. And that's a different set of partnerships. So for me, it's really a kind of an idea of its time. And what's exciting now is to see that idea sort of translating into reality on the ground. And I'm really hopeful that by the end of this year, we will see some real movements in terms of transactions. And just to Roselyn's point, this is such a nascent world, right? This is a new frontier. And it has been difficult, and there's no shying away from that. It's difficult kind of building these transactions. It's a difficult market context. But I think what we're excited about is to see that there is real progress happening, that these different ingredients, these different, both the technical piece, but actually the relationships that are needed to kind of drive this market to scale are increasingly coming into place. And then I guess the final thing I'd like to say is just for us, it's going to be really important to think about how we as a donor organization, sometimes governments are not the most agile in terms of how we operate. And we have a series of parameters that we have to work within in order to ensure that we're kind of conforming with all of the rules. And I think what we're excited about is to be working in a way where we can try to test what, you know, when these big ideas hit the ground and have contact with reality, we have to be able to be agile together. And I think one of the things that corporates, partners like EDF can bring is together with sovereigns is that sort of agility in order to adapt to a really demanding context, but one that's really fundamental that we solve for the challenges that you're working on. So thanks to you and all the team.
Thank you, Joe. And that agility is so important. And I'd like to bring in Edwina here in just a minute. But you know, one of the I guess you can say an innovation is, and Edwina is part of the Emergent team, which is why I'm mentioning this now, is you know, the creation of Emergent as a nonprofit intermediary that essentially acts as the transaction intermediary and also the convener of the coalition. It acts in many ways as social enterprise, but as a nonprofit. And that is really to keep the neutrality, the independence, and the transparency that we think is needed to maintain the integrity throughout the process. But we strive to be very agile in the way that we do this. So Edwina leads our corporate engagement team, and so she's here sort of representing, I guess you could say, the corporates that are in the LEAF coalition. So Edwina, tell us what you are hearing from corporates, and you know, why they're joining, what they're talking about, some of the challenges maybe that they've had over the last year, and what opportunities they see in the LEAF coalition.
Sure, happy to. And hi, everyone. And thank you for having me today. And great to be on a panel with so many amazing people. So as Aaron said, I'm working very closely with many of the corporates that are in the LEAF coalition or actively considering jurisdictional REDD+ as part of their carbon and nature strategies. And I think it's worth noting that many of the companies in the coalition, you know, they come from a range of different sectors, a range of different perspectives. But what they do have in common is that they are taking a high ambition pathway to net zero. And they also fundamentally recognize the role of halting deforestation in meeting both our global, but also their own corporate climate, nature, and people strategies. So the teams that we're working with, you know, they're very highly motivated to deliver the deep decarbonization that needs to happen in their own value chains, but they also recognize that more needs to be done. And they're engaging in what we call beyond value chain mitigation. So investing in nature-based solutions and participating in initiatives and investing in initiatives like LEAF. So I think what I hear anyway from companies that are either engaged in LEAF or thinking about joining LEAF or just actively participating in the jurisdictional REDD+ market is that there's a number of reasons why they're attractive, but there's kind of three key themes, and that centers around scale, integrity, and importantly, impact. So I think on the scale piece, from a corporate perspective, there's an opportunity to go further with their investments. So being able to pool resources with other buyers, both from the private sector and donor funders, and they're able to amplify a demand signal to really support, you know, the the generation of jurisdictional crediting. And that is very key, I think, in terms of the scale side. And I think there's a recognition of the very hard work, that forest nations and wider stakeholders are doing in this area. And there's an active of want and anticipation and excitement around these first deals and driving private sector finance to this work in a way that hasn't been done before. On the point on integrity, I think that is very, very key, again, to some of the points that Joe's raised, on both the demand as well as supply side. So I think companies being able to come together with high integrity peers that meet the LEAF strict buyers criteria, that share common objectives and goals, but also being able to work with sovereign donors, the UK, the US, Norway, Korea, as well as wider partners like EDF. That sort of integrity on the demand side is very key, particularly in the current market. And of course, on the supply side, the Art Trees standard, the robust environmental and social safeguards are very fundamental. But I think related to that as well is the jurisdictional approach also mitigates and manages many of the risks that corporates can typically face in these types of investments. So issues of, baselining and overcrediting, leakage, reversals, not having active inclusion and participation of a wide range of stakeholders. The fact that the jurisdictional approach helps to avoid and mitigate some of those risks is very key. And then I think just on impact, and personally, I think this is fundamental, and it's an emissions reduction credit, but what's delivered within that is much, much more. And I think being able to have those wider nature people benefits from these types of investments is really fundamental and key. And the fact that the model is about creating a sustained, sustainable financing source for the work that's being done is really fundamental. So in terms of maybe the exam question and kind of the key challenge and opportunity, as I'd like to call it, I think there's a lot of uncertainty still in the corporate side of things. But I do think that we all have a role to play in helping to enable, reward and incentivize this type of high integrity, high ambition investment and really enable that to happen now and sort of not wait. Relatedly, I think with the advent of the global biodiversity goals agreed last year, and many corporates are thinking about their nature strategies and goals in addition to their climate strategies, and seeing how jurisdictional REDD Plus is able to deliver on so many co-benefits, seeing how that can really support those strategies and support that market, I think is a key opportunity for growth.
Yeah. Thank you, Edwina. And I just want to make a quick point here that, we are really involved now in the exercise of building a market, right? Make no mistake about it. We are creating and scaling a market for jurisdictional REDD Plus. And our view is the only way to do that is to do that with integrity and transparency. And as I said earlier, transactions that are a win-win-win for all. And we started with the demand side because we thought that really was the engine that could pull the supply, but we don't take for granted any of the supply or any of the demand. Businesses on the demand side, they need to make a business case to continue purchasing credits and scaling their initiatives. The host jurisdictions also need to make their internal case that this is the right price, this is the right thing for us to do, these are the right commitments to make, and this is how we want to do it. So we don't take any of that for granted. And I think it's really important that we keep this. Sometimes we get asked, well, hey, Emergent, you guys are sitting on $1.5 billion. Why aren't we just deploying it? Well, we're not really, right? We've got commitments, right? And we hope to grow those commitments, but we need to see action on both sides. And we don't take any of that for granted. And so we really are, and I think you've heard here from supply, demand, corporate donor, and a community representative. I want to turn now to Mark Moroge, who's the Vice President for Natural Climate Solutions at Environmental Defense Fund. Did I get that right? Yeah, close enough. EDF has been a critical partner from the first day of the development of Emergent. Want to recognize Ruben Lebowski and Steve Schwartzman, who were at the very beginning of the journey. So thanks very much, guys, and thanks for being here. But EDF from in a civil society perspective, Mark, give us your perspective on how you've been engaging with LEAF, and you know, let's start getting into how the rubber is hitting the ground. So give us your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron. It's really an honor to share the stage with you all and be together with all of you here. You know, and hearing everyone's interventions reminded me of the journey that I think we've all been on for many years. And so I was just curious, you know, how many of you all in the audience have been, you know, we're kind of touching REDD processes kind of at the ground floor to speak, maybe like 28, 29, 2010. Who's been, I suspect, a pretty critical mass. Do you remember what that was like at that time? Like, I remember working on one of like a pretty early stage, very large readiness grant, actually for Mexico around like 2011. And it was, the whole thing was a bold new world, and everything needed to be created. MRV systems, reference levels, capacity building, safeguards. What does it all look like? The market, $2, $4, whatever, everything. And, you know, I'll put my own color on this, but, and you know, it's like hindsight's 2020, but I seem to remember that there was so much energy and optimism around getting early proof points in order to really move towards large scale programming because of the widespread acknowledgement that we have to solve deforestation in the tropics at a global scale. But we don't want to stop some of it. We want to stop all of it and do that in a way that's very equitable and driving sustainable development. And so I just wanted to share that. That's my, you know, kind of read when I look back, and I welcome talking with you all further about your own. But, and then, you know, as time went on, it got harder and we advanced, but also it just got more complicated. And we've largely, I think the community is largely staying the course, but sometimes you can lose a little bit of hope or light at the end of the tunnel. And I also want to note that, you know, I welcome Roselyn's perspective on this and Gustavo and others, but it doesn't seem like the bar ever gets lower. It seems like every couple of years it gets higher. And now it's getting higher for buyers too. So we're all kind of ratcheting up the level of expectation and ambition to an incredibly high degree. And that's a good thing. And we also need to have some, you know, I think grace and understanding and continue to build partnerships and work together, as Joanna and Gustavo are mentioning. But all that to say is, I guess if I look back to 2010, 2011 today, it kind of feels a little bit like these concepts of public-private financing for large-scale jurisdiction of REDD. Maybe we're a little bit ahead of their time. We've learned a ton. We had a lot of hiccups, tons of learnings, as Gustavo has referenced. I think Juan Carlos Hintiach had some beautiful interventions in another panel yesterday. He's like, hey, maybe this didn't work, but that doesn't mean it's been discarded. It's still here latent and we're retaking it. The social processes, multi-stakeholder platforms, safeguards mechanisms, and so on and so forth. But I think the fundamental point I'd like to try and get across is, if it was a little bit early or ahead of its time in 2010, 2011, it sure doesn't feel that way today. It really feels like this is the moment. That's not to say it's easy. It's tremendously challenging, as we all know, this whole concept of large-scale REDD, particularly in this market environment. But EDF looks forward to continuing to partner with you all and everyone in this room to continue to do our part to just stay the course. Aaron is talking about transactions forthcoming. Gustavo has this amazing vision for how we can bring these programs to ground in a way that's really done in service of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Roselyn, as you know, Ghana really paving the way in many dimensions. Joanna, hearing you talk about the principle of agility is important. And I think that might be maybe a newer message from some parties. So we can get there, and we just got to stay the course. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. maybe take us back even a little further, 2007 COP in Bali, European carbon prices at 30 euros a ton. REDD hits the UNFCCC and everyone we'll take a year to figure this all out, and then we've got a market in Europe, and we've got a pathway to solving deforestation. So I make that point to say that it is not easy, right? And we can't, again, the point I was making earlier, we can't take for granted that this market is just going to be here, right? What happened then? The technical bits were harder than people thought. There was political issues, and then of course the European market tanked, right? And so we lost that key demand driver, right? It went from 30 euros a ton to 3 euros a ton in a matter of a year or two, right? So we lost that demand signal. So that's why, as I say, we're not taking any of that for granted. We need to nurture both sides of this market, the supply side and the demand side. And we need to make sure the bar is high, but not too high, right? Roselyn, let me come back to you. We all wish we could get ERPAs done as quickly as possible. And so help you talked a little bit about, you know, how the rubber hits the road. Maybe I'd ask this, the good, the bad, and the ugly here, right? So what has been, maybe help us understand how the rubber is hitting the road in Ghana. What has taken longer than expected? And then the second part of that question, maybe leave it slightly more optimistic. What are your hopes now, you know, over the next year, and what would you like to see?
I feel like Aaron is trying to put whatever I'll say in a box before I say it. I don't think I've gotten so notorious over time, no. Anyway, but what it is must be said, and yes. So before I go to the question you asked, this whole question about the bar, I seriously don't think it's the bar, Mark. Aaron, it's not the bar that's being raised higher. We are just shifting the goalpost, seriously. And I think that this goalpost shifting is just making things difficult for countries to meet some of these requirements that we are putting out there. If you have a country that has been through the FCPF process or the UN REDD process and has gotten to a stage where they have results-based payments, they actually been receiving funds. I mean, what's this whole process of high integrity again? We need to appreciate process, because we are just shifting the goalposts in a space where we say we want to create a higher demand, in a space where the Guardian keeps coming up with articles that are disturbing this same market. I think that Leaf could be the game changer in this whole Guardian article and what it wants to say, or whoever it is that is talking, because we have the corporates in Leaf. Can we drive that? Wherever the goalpost is now, let's try and score a goal. I think it's important, exactly. Let's try and score a goal before we shift the goalpost again, because we are just making it difficult to score a goal, and then we are saying that people are not working as hard as they should work. I mean, my team and I work like 24/7. I mean, most of your team members have met us. We are a very small team. We are dedicated to this. We are pushing through different political bottlenecks, technical bottlenecks. And so we wouldn't just want to wake up today and hear that, oh, we have, and I mean, no real offense, but we have like a 30-page ERPA to sign and negotiate. What's this, 30 pages, 40 pages? The language is so technical. The language is so repetitive. Is this what we want to use to drive the market? No. We signed an ERPA with the FCPF. I don't think it was even up to 10 pages. And it's delivering, and the FCPF hasn't been an easy joke. It's been 12 years. Even if it was a joke, it's been a 12-year joke.
Well, so we're doing pretty good with 2 years.
No, you should have done that in 6 months. You should discount the FCPF 12 years. But I mean, I think that Leaf really has the opportunity to make this game changer. And the real big ask here for me, I don't know how many of the Leaf corporates are in this room, but I think that the Leaf corporates needs to begin to understand what it takes really on the supply side to come to where we are, what it means for Costa Rica, what it means for Ghana, what it means for Kenya. These are complex systems in countries, complex landscapes. When you talk about forests are complex. Whatever price we are offering now, really, it's not even a price that we are offering. We can't really pay for the life. You see, when we talk about human trafficking, it's just like trees. If you want to pay for the life of a tree, it's just like the life of a human being. They are giving us our oxygen, we are giving them our carbon dioxide. We talk about human trafficking and the importance of a life. When a tree is taken, that's what it means. If illegal mining takes out a tree, that's what it means. If illegal logging takes out a tree, so what price are we willing to pay for us to have those trees standing? It's not about 52-page ERPAs. No, not every country can sign that. If we want to involve indigenous people and local communities, to what extent do we want them to sign these ERPAs? They're never going to sign these ERPAs. And then somebody has to front. And the question is, who is fronting for that to happen? If you don't get the right person fronting, we could land in a different scenario altogether. And then maybe I move to the next opportunity really with leave. And the fact that you are thinking about jurisdictional scale within a voluntary carbon market, which is phenomenal, because the VCM I knew before was project-based, was volatile. I mean, even projects in Ghana, I think we have about 2 or 3, none came to the Forestry Commission's climate change office. We don't know what they discuss with local communities. We don't know how much they are giving them. We don't know how much they are trading on the market. But with LEAF, it's different. It's jurisdictional. The government has a role to play. The local people have a role to play. The private sector also has a role to play. And we even believe that we can use that as a leverage to get other private sector entities who are in Ghana to come on board, because we have the cocoa private sector who are an active force and are constantly asking questions in the next phase beyond the FCPF. How can we also benefit from this carbon market that everybody is talking about existing in Ghana, but we are here and we're not really seeing what it means for us. So we really have a very wonderful opportunity. And I want us not to shift that goalpost again. Wherever it is, let it stay there. Let's try and score about 2 or 3 goals, and let's understand what those goals mean to all of us in this partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Roselyn. That's great. And maybe just hold the mic for a second. So looking forward, right, next 6, 12, 18 months, what would you like to see, or what would you hope to see from Emergent, from LEAF, from the community, from the corporates? You mentioned some of it. Definitely a shorter ERPA, and we're working on that, just so you know. Shorter ERPA, consistent goalposts, but maybe a little bit more. You know, what do you hope to see?
So we want to see the demand from the coalition matching that of the supply side. I mean, Ghana has credits from 2017, 18, 19. For example, I'm using Ghana as an example because ERPAs are being negotiated in different contexts in different countries. But so far, we don't have any demand for our 2017 credits coming from the coalition. 2018 is just something very small. If the coalition is interested in Ghana and in wanting to sign an ERPA, it should be beyond just particular years of interest to corporates. We understand that corporates also have targets, but the point is, what are we shifting this market towards? Towards 1.5. It's not towards a corporate entity's sustainability principle or requirement. Let's look at the bigger picture. The climate change is happening now. It's happening at a bigger scale. And for a country like Ghana, we could have just said, I mean, what is really the ratio of our emissions to whatever is happening globally? But I don't think that at this point, it makes sense for any country, even if you're not emitting, to really sit and say, let me just watch, because anything could happen. And so if we are putting ourselves out there, we would want to see the demand cutting across different years and meeting really the needs of the host jurisdictions. And we'd also want to see upfront finance coming in. And I said this in the previous panel. We need upfront finance. The area that the tree standard requires us to cover is bigger, for example, in Ghana, than the area that the FCPF covered. It means we have to do more work. We have to extend the outreach to other areas. But we don't have any pot of money sitting anywhere to do that. So if we can have that coming in, and I think that one of the models that Emergent is doing is, then what about the pre-leaf years? So that could be the sale that really ramps up the funding that we need or the finance that we need. But if that sale is also being selective with the vintage years, and for example, neglecting everything that has been done in 2017, that's not going to help. And of course, in the next 18 months, we want to see about 6 or 10 ERPAs signed. It's not just about Ghana's ERPA. If Ghana signs an ERPA and other countries don't sign, it doesn't add up. That's not scale. Scale is both within country and out of country, because this is a global problem we are trying to solve. Thank you.
Thank you, Roselyn. And turning to you, Gustavo, can you expand on, as Mark mentioned, your vision here for the way that IP&LC communities can more fully participate and benefit from these types of programs?
Bueno, a ver, se requiere creo que hay muchos retos hacia adelante, pero quisiera enfocarme en un cambio de paradigma necesario en el contexto de de las actuales iniciativas REDD y es relacionado con lo que señalaba hace un rato. Este cambio de paradigma es percibir a pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales como socios y no como beneficiarios. Esto nos da una perspectiva distinta porque desde el momento en que las empresas, los gobiernos nos vean como socios, tendrían que estar estableciendo procesos de diálogo. La consulta no debe de ser pensada como un requisito que hay que presentar en algún estándar, sino se tiene que realmente construir de manera conjunta o co-construir atendiendo cuáles son las prioridades que tiene nuestro socio. Cuando queremos hacer un emprendimiento e invitamos a alguien como socio, estamos pensando en que somos iguales o que debemos de situarnos a un mismo nivel. Entonces quisiéramos nosotros ver más este tipo de asociaciones, más este tipo de diálogos y que no se vuelva una cuestión
association
excepcional.
and dialogue, and not
Aquellos-
just accept matter.
y que no se vuelva una excepción. Por ejemplo, hemos estado en estos días comentando que en América Latina, por ejemplo, Costa Rica es un caso excepcional, pero nos gustaría ver más procesos como el de Costa Rica que pueden mostrar procesos de participación y de toma de decisiones realmente junto con pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. Me parece que por ahí tendríamos que abordar el reto hacia el futuro de estas iniciativas a nivel jurisdiccional, como decía, para desplegar todo el potencial que puede tener iniciativas como LIF. Gracias.
Thank you, Gustavo. And we talked about learning and the learning by doing, and I would say this is something, at least speaking for myself, this is something that we've learned over the last few years, that this is not just about safeguards and even consent or information. This is about, as you say, Gustavo, IP&LC groups being partners in the process. And so this is something that we are at Emergent investing in deeply, looking for additional resources to invest in deeply and partnering very closely also with our partners, including with EDF. So Mark, I want to come to you here a bit. Maybe you can pick up on this theme a bit and then expand on maybe some of the things that you heard from Roselyn about maybe some advanced payments and things like this that you hear coming up.
Sounds great. You want me to talk about the prepayment facility? Great. Okay. Well, there's a lot of ground to cover here. I would just briefly, I guess, +1 everything that Gustavo described, and I think the growing number of partners. We're very humbled to count ourselves amongst one of them as EDF, and there are many others of you in this room who are working increasingly to make sure that the processes and the conditions and the knowledge and the capacities are in place to engage on even terms between local groups and government counterparts to design a REDD program that works and benefits distribution mechanisms that work. Essential and a requirement of the program for those who are unaware. This stuff is required. And to Roselyn's Roselyn's excellent point, stuff doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen, right? You're essentially talking about how you shift the way that the rural economy in Ghana works. That's not easy. And so demand signals are great and they're essential. And I applaud everyone's efforts to kind of take a more holistic view on, we're talking about market creation, we're talking about balancing supply and demand and the roles and preparedness of all stakeholders in that system. And to your last point, Aaron, I wanted to applaud the efforts of Emergent, other colleagues in my team and other involved parties in trying to kind of find these milestones and breakthroughs to start to create a clearer path to bringing forward financing at earlier stages for committed jurisdictions. So, a tip of my hat to the Emergent team, and again, all involved, for being able to structure essentially a prepayment facility that we're very hopeful will, touch ground in the real world very soon, but that would essentially allow interested jurisdictions to be able to, upon ERPA signature, access, some seed capital, to be able to start to close these gaps between results-based financing system and the upfront funding that you need to get the job done and make it through to those durable market transactions. So back to you.
And very concise, Mark. Thank you. So I want to recognize also Edwina coming to you, and let me just say, go to Edwina and then Joe to kind of bring us home, and we've got about 20 to 30 minutes for questions, comments from all of you. Want to bring all of you into the conversation because, of course, a lot of experts in the room, a lot of partners, participants in LEAF, and so I want to bring you, and I will be buying a drink to the best questions at the reception. So think about your questions now. Edwina, I want to acknowledge, the last year there's been certainly some headwinds. We've referred to it here. There have been some headwinds in carbon markets. Roselyn referred to the Guardian article. Could you help maybe unpack some of those headwinds, and give us a little bit of a preview on what we see, or at least maybe a hopeful preview potentially of the future on how this, we know the standard setters are trying to come out, trying to fix potentially some of the damage that they've unintentional damage that they've done over the last year in the lead up to COP, and some hopeful signs going into next year. Let's call it more broadly for the voluntary carbon market, and then specifically for jurisdictional REDD.
Sure, happy to. So you touched on a few points there. I think it's been a challenging year on the demand side of the equation. I think many companies, at least all the companies that I speak to, are very much, trying to do the right thing. The intention is there, and I think there is a number of different elements in the wider enabling landscape, which has been challenging. So whether it's the traditional business case around carbon offsetting and relative claims, whether it's guidance and alignment on, what should be beyond value chain mitigation and how much and how that should complement a decarbonization strategy, or the broader sort of guidance from VCMI and ICVCM on the various integrity guidelines and standards. And I think that is converging, and it is moving in the right direction. And we certainly hear that from a number of different angles. I will say that on maybe the upside of that sort of challenging sort of uncertainty being the kind of key theme there around, okay, we're committed to this, but how do we sort of really articulate that business case and either put our neck out or not, or sort of shy away. There's a flip side to that, which I think is quite positive, and it relates, I think, to some of the points that Roselyn made around sort of historical vintages, et cetera, that there's a wider narrative here, and whether you want to call it co-benefits, holistic impact, what we're really trying to do here is drive, real change on the ground. And I think many of the corporates recognize that. They want to learn more about it and build out that narrative and support. So I would say I touched on it in the opening piece around whether you want to call it sort of nature or sort of carbon strategies. I think there's a growing recognition that, okay, we might call it something different, but fundamentally what we're doing is trying to channel large scale finance and support the efforts of forest nations and all the stakeholders involved in doing what we need to do. So that for me is the sort of hopeful lens on a challenging market as we move into the new year. And I think with hopefully these first, agreements and having that proof of concept, off the ground, that with that, the demand, I would say, should build from that as well, because these are the first transactions and there is an element of sort of trepidation around that, but also an utmost sort of commitment and wanting to see this happen and to make it work and make it work in a sort of fair and equitable way as well.
Thanks, Edwina. And Joe, over to you. As feel free to react to anything that you've heard here, but maybe also, from a perspective again of the sovereign donors, and of course UK. But insofar as you feel like you can speak for, well, I wouldn't put you on the spot to speak for US, Norway, and Korea, who are also participating in LEED. But
Not with Andreas and the.
that's right.
just
But as the what where do you see, or where do you hope LEAF will go over the next relatively short term, year to 3 years?
Thanks. So I think there are probably three things I'd just like to sort of pick out. So one is that as particularly as transactions come on the stream, what I'd love to see LEAF do is really be able to tell this story, right? Because I think it's a very complicated business that we're in, and sometimes we get a little bit lost, I think, in that kind of technical complexity, the legal complexity. It's very, very complicated. And in a context where we've seen such a direct correlation between storytelling and price, which is what's happened with Verra, I'd really love us to take a moment, in fact, quite a few moments probably between now and COP28, to be really getting the story out there about why this stuff is so important, and to be very clear about the urgency and about the role that these markets play, and to be unapologetic about that. So I guess that's the first thing, is let's communicate better about what we do. I think this, and why we do it, and why it works. I don't mean in that's around greenwashing and glossing over the difficulties, because they are real and they need to be dealt with. But I think what we're seeing is, in your sort of spirit of learning by doing, that we are adjusting the model. So for example, we've spoken to the creation of the pre-finance facility. I think, we're kind of trying to, as you say, kind of simplify the ERPAs, etc. So, there is about being responsive to the challenge, but we need to celebrate what we've done. So that's the sort of first point. The second point is, in the process of creating this market, and I think a kind of theme that's come out quite a lot here is just making sure that the best is not the enemy of the good, right? So how do we arrive at this Goldilocks point where we're confident about environmental and social integrity, but not building the criteria so high of sort of standard perfection that it actually becomes impossible to transact? So all of the people in this room are going to help to shape that conversation. And it's a really, really important conversation to get it right. We don't want it to be too, in Goldilocks terms, the porridge to be too cold. We don't want it to be too hot. We want to get it just right. And the third piece is really around how we deal with this complexity, which I've sort of referred to before. And I think that's important, because how do we make sure that we're simplifying the process of these transactions without being simplistic and about losing the precision of what's particularly in terms of making sure we're delivering on real carbon benefits, as well as delivering real social benefits, because that complexity is at risk of actually providing barriers to entry on both sides, I think. So I think there's something about how in the next little time, we're really celebrating the success and the value. We're really thinking quite hard about what kind of market we're trying to create. Why do we want this market? Well, it's because we really would quite like to save the planet, and because we would really quite like to make sure that the communities and countries who are holding this extraordinary natural asset receive true financial benefit for the first time. And we really want to make sure that that it's possible to do these transactions in a way that is efficient and effective for everyone. So, you know, just to put those things out there. And I think Emergent, you know, that's a pretty long list of things, but I think there's a kind of community of practice around this space right now that if we can mobilize them, particularly in the next few months, to kind of stabilize that demand, stabilize confidence, and hopefully we can kind of provide a good glide path. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That was really excellent, taking notes. I mean, I think, you know, one of the challenges, of course, is that there are a few people outside this room who really understand the difference between a project REDD, jurisdictional REDD, and even within projects, there are lots of good projects and there's bad projects, and people aren't able to make the distinction. So when there's one, it spoils a lot. But I think this is a great list. We have to communicate the story better and celebrate our successes. Don't let the perfect be an enemy of the good, and simplify without being simplistic. I think that's a great list. So let's pause here. Maybe a show of hands. I don't know if we have microphones in the audience, otherwise you got. Please raise your hand, comments, questions, thoughts, eager to hear. This is what I do in my class. If I don't see people raising hands, I'm just going to call on you. Nick, oh yeah, sorry. We got one back here. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you all. I'm Steve Schwartzman with EDF. And thank all the panelists for really terrific and very informative presentations. So my question is, I guess, for Aaron and Edwina in the first place, but anybody else on the panel that maybe wants to answer. And we've done in the Amazon over the last year about 10 workshops with indigenous peoples organizations, local community organizations on climate change and carbon markets, and even more in the Andean countries. My colleague Barbara Henneberger is there and can tell you all about them. So what I'm seeing all over everywhere in the Amazon is huge concern with project developers. On the one hand, communities are being besieged by project developers. They're really worried, and by and large, the developers are really pretty reprehensible in the way they deal with the communities, I have to say. Not 100%, but generally. On the other hand, there's a huge interest on the part of the communities in projects because they see them very often as something that they can control themselves, and they don't trust governments. Even in cases where we have good cases in Brazil in particular, where jurisdictional systems have generated real benefits for local communities, indigenous peoples, nobody trusts government. So, I don't know, you mentioned the Guardian articles, and there's now a recent Science article on REDD projects and how credible they are, which sounds to me kind of like a death knell for private individual voluntary market REDD projects. How do you see the possibility for local communities, indigenous communities in particular, to be able to develop their own projects that they can control in the context of jurisdictional systems, if you see it at all? And how do you see the future of private voluntary market products more broadly?
You want me to take it? Anybody else want to? Yeah, go ahead. I don't want to put you on the spot. So the great, Stephen, thank you. Great, really great question. And I think on both of those, I think on the first, there is a huge amount of project development happening because of the demand, and I think we've got a lot of demand coming from the high emitting sector, oil and gas and others. We have intentionally, because of the buyer criteria, we don't have oil and gas in the coalition. I think as we think about the next phase, we need to find a way to bring on high emitters in a credible way to demonstrate that they are actually taking action, not delaying climate action, into some sort of high integrity coalition approach. Otherwise, I think we're going to get a lot of these project developers out there in the sort of Wild West, looking for sourcing supply for these types of companies. In terms of projects, I think there's an opportunity here for projects to be nested. We've all talked about nesting, but within a jurisdictional program. So within a program within the country, right? So so it becomes the jurisdiction's prerogative to allow or not allow projects within their jurisdiction. I think that's a potentially viable vision. But Roselyn, interested in your thoughts.
Sorry, thank you. So to your last question, at what point do we think we are going to see Indigenous people and local communities being able to submit more like their own proposals and lead their own programs? I think it's the point where we do away with all the airpass and just agree that these are standing for us. We need to commit resources to take care of them. We don't need to sign any airpass. The point where, for example, and I'm not putting Joe on the spot, where the UK government, Norway, USA, any other donor or sovereign state says that I'm going to do away with all my paperwork, the World Bank says, I don't want to see any of those paperwork. Because if we are still going to have all those processes, it will be very difficult to have that sort of structure set up. And again, I think it's also going to depend on what happens in countries. So it's not just about the UK or the Norway or the US. It's also about the governments or the countries where Indigenous people and local communities are located, and what those governments are putting in place to ensure that local communities and Indigenous people have their way, have their say, are ably represented, and have the capacity to lead their own engagements. Now, for Ghana, we don't have Indigenous people. And most times what I'm telling people is that Indigenous people and local communities have different nuances. When you put them together, you think they are the same. But local communities have the issues that they face. Indigenous people have the issues. We have some cross-cutting, but they are not the same. I think that most times some local communities have some sort of flexibility. If you come into Ghana, what we did with REDD+ never really recognized local people as just beneficiaries. Even the government is a beneficiary. We are all stakeholders in that process. So we started from day one, sitting around the same table, identifying what the design should be like, what should be the concept, how do we roll this out? Until you get to that stage, you have not empowered your stakeholders enough. And that's the sort of structure we have in country. So national governments must be able to build that structure of trust. There are entities in Ghana who are against REDD+. Today, they are the ones seeking for REDD+ support to help them engage local communities because they realize the benefits. 69% of our payments are going directly to local communities with their own accounts. There's no third-party interference. So it tells you like the maturity of the process and where we've come to. So it takes a lot of different like pieces to get to that stage where we're able to trust that local communities and Indigenous people can make their own decisions, should be at the forefront of managing their own resources. And it's not just any single entity's work to do. From donors to the supply side, to corporates, everybody has a role to play in that. And we must give that due recognition to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And we had, Nick, did you have a question? No. So Beto.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for a great panel. This is Beto Borges with Forestry. I just wanted to follow up on Steve's point. You know, while it's true that there are a lot of problematic projects out there, I wouldn't even classify them as project developers or interest groups that are sort of going about fraudulent projects. And at the same time, it has been our experience that very serious project developers as well. And so I think Roselyn mentioned something, but not sure this panel, I'm confusing the panels or the previous one, talking about partnership. So when it comes to project development, and I wanted to address this question particularly to Gustavo, because in which way, in my mind, I would say from where we stand for strengths, where climate finance is best positioned for Indigenous peoples. Would it be through jurisdictional framework or project-based? And the question is somewhere in between. In other words, which ones are going to bring then the highest flow of benefits? When you look at $10 per ton, when you take out the transaction costs, would then be better off going straight to a voluntary carbon market opportunity or not? And so, in other words, the voices that we hear from Indigenous organizations, not that they're no longer interested in projects because the media is not really listening to them. So, and what would you say about that, Gustavo?
Quisiera asegurarme de que escuché muy bien la pregunta porque venía un poco desfasada la interpretación. Sí. Y creo que uno de los, gracias Beto, uno de los de las propuestas que estamos poniendo sobre la mesa en estos espacios, las organizaciones de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, es un diagnóstico en general sobre el sistema de financiamiento climático, donde una característica es que no está diseñado pensando en que las comunidades accedan directamente, tanto en mecanismos de mercado como de no mercado. Entonces, está pensado como para que haya necesariamente intermediarios y me parece que en algunos casos no debería de ser eso considerado una condición indispensable. Tanto en los mecanismos de no mercado, por ejemplo, gran parte de la financiación que se ha hecho en la última década, bueno, hay estudios de que ha llegado menos del 10% a los territorios. En el camino se ha quedado la mayor parte. No decimos que es un desperdicio, pero se han fortalecido algunas áreas de gobierno, de grandes ONGs, de organismos multilaterales, lo cual es bueno, pero a los territorios no está llegando financiamiento. Entonces, por ejemplo, en el caso de mecanismos de no mercado, estamos construyendo nuestros propios instrumentos. En el caso de la Alianza Mesoamericana de Pueblos y Bosques, hemos construido el Fondo Territorial Mesoamericano. En Indonesia se ha construido otro fondo que se llama Nusantara. En Brasil uno que se llama Fondo Podali. Y precisamente hoy en la mañana estábamos en las oficinas de la Fundación Ford con este grupo que se llama FCLP, de Forest Climate Leader Partnership, haciéndoles una invitación, un mensaje de que ya tenemos construidos los mecanismos de financiamiento. Necesitamos la confianza para que fluya cada vez más recursos de manera progresiva, pero sostenida a través de esos mecanismos. Ahora, trasladándonos al ámbito de los mercados, también consideramos que las organizaciones de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales pueden ir desarrollando capacidades para acceder directamente a una relación sin tanto intermediarismo entre comprador y vendedor, pero pensándolo en una cuestión, digamos, horizontal. Reconocemos el papel de los gobiernos en las iniciativas jurisdiccionales. En algunos casos puede dar más certidumbre respecto a las estrategias, pero no necesariamente tendría que estar una disyuntiva entre un proyecto individual o una estrategia jurisdiccional. Creo que tendríamos que empezar a empujar en visiones conjuntas, pero sí una cuestión de debilidad de los mercados es quitar el excesivo intermediarismo en algunos mecanismos. No quisiéramos que el desarrollador del proyecto, el implementador, se lleve más recursos que las comunidades. Gracias.
That was great. Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions or comments. Andres?
Thank you. I'm getting tired, so I was about to let Joe represent us, but just a point, I think on the demand side, I mean, the Guardian articles should have tripled demand for leaf if we did our communications jointly the right way. So if the project market, yes, they could be good projects, but overall, they have not delivered the environmental impact, and they've had disastrous social consequences in some cases. So if that market was good the way it was, we wouldn't have had a need to set up LEAF, right? So why we're not able to communicate that this is different, that this demand that was pursuing these projects has another option, which is what we've been working on for 10, 15 years and countries are preparing for. I don't know, it's worth asking ourselves that, because I think, yes, there are good projects, but there is a difference between that approach and what the forest countries are pursuing. We now have bilateral partnerships where the countries are not in a position to receive payments for results because there are a number of projects they don't know about, right? So the governments haven't even engaged with those projects. And there's regulations coming in multiple countries because they see this as a challenge. They want to be serious. They want to present their NDC and they want to have clarity of what's going on in their country, right? And yes, I've struggled with this a lot as well, because from environmental grounds, obviously jurisdictional approach is better because you avoid the leakage and you sort of you promote public policies and you sort of have properly designed, you could target your incentive both at the government, public policies, communities, project developers as well within a proper system. But right now, I feel like we need to recognize that this is a better way forward. So what I hear about communities, I think, is absolutely true. There are communities that have wanted projects because they've been good projects. But I came from the same event at the Ford Foundation for at least part of it. And I see a remarkable alignment of indigenous peoples in a way we haven't seen before around national processes properly designed in ways that can benefit them. When they are consulted, they're part of the public policy process of the country about benefit sharing, but also about rights and land rights and protected indigenous territories. There's a whole broader discussion that they're also part of. It's not just about getting a share of the money. And so, when Sonia is talking about Brazil, I think the indigenous movement of Brazil, they're not talking about primarily about getting X dollars per hectare of forest. They're talking about their rights. And so that is what we're giving up if we're saying that for social reasons, we need to have a bottom-up process. So we need to square this and have a socially inclusive process that has environmental integrity. And I think that's what LEAF is about to us. And that's what we should mobilize demand around. And we should say the norms for the companies is a different point. Should not be about planting trees in 2040. It should be about protecting the forest that we risk losing in the next 2 decades. Thanks.
Thanks, Andres. A question here.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Fermín Chimatani Tayori, soy del pueblo Aracnbut de la Amazonía de Perú. Los pueblos indígenas de Perú, ¿no? Hemos pensado en pedir créditos de carbono al gobierno, ¿no? A la cuenta de los pueblos indígenas. Entonces, mi pregunta es que LEAF compraría directamente esos créditos a los pueblos indígenas.
Well, thanks for the question. At the moment, LEAF cannot Leaf cannot buy directly from indigenous people, and this is an art process, right? An art, we work with the art tree standard. And so indigenous project would be nested with, oh, Christy. What? Okay, that's a good clarification. Yeah, Christy.
So sorry. Hi, I'm Christy Matricker, Managing Director of the Art Secretariat. So I just wanted to point out that not only governments can have trees credits, right? So if it is a nested project and the arrangement is that they receive trees credits, so whether it's our project developer or a indigenous peoples community or anybody, they could receive trees credits and have an art registry account and have those trees credits, and they could sell it to anyone who wants to buy trees credits, which would include Leaf. So, if there were that sort of arrangement, I don't want to speak for Leaf, but it seems to me, if your mandate is to buy Leaf's credits, and you could buy them from indigenous people as well.
Thanks for the clarification. Any last questions? I think we've got another 5 minutes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we've seen, beyond value chain mitigation is driving some of the corporate demand for avoidance credits, but it still seems like there's much more demand for removals. And so kind of following up on the question from before, like how do we get corporates to get more interest in avoidance credits?
Mark?
What an excellent question. And got some strong competition for that beer, Aaron, so you better be ready here. I welcome continuing conversation post session and far beyond. This is such a great dialogue. I think your question's not unrelated from the very important point that Andreas was making. Where's the safe space to lean in any way, shape, or form right now on high integrity, emissions reductions from forest conservation, avoided deforestation? Your point's very well taken, right? Like this is a new species, it's a different animal at the same time. And I don't want to oversimplify, but a lot of the conversations that I'm having and a lot of our team at least is having, sometimes it's difficult for folks who aren't in the game to parse REDD versus jurisdictional REDD versus this standard versus that standard. And I do think that there's, my personal view on this is that the more that we become a kind of circular firing squad, I think the more it crowds the more it pulls some motivated interest to the sidelines. There's not an easy solution here, but I think there's a lot of introspection that we would all gain from your questions. And I know many organizations, including ourselves, are trying to find the right pathway forward, both with messaging, framing, differentiation, and also I do think at some point, what's going to really drive the change is that the credits are there and the proof points exist. So that's also, a positive development that we can all start to build around. And thanks to you both.
Okay, so we're almost out of time and to be continued afterwards over a few drinks, but let me just offer, we do have 5 minutes left. So let me just go down the panel. 30-second reflection on the panel on anything else you'd like to raise. Mark, maybe starting with you, and we'll come down this way and then close it out. So Mark.
Let's not lose sight of the big picture, stay the course together. A lot of us in this room have different strategies or approaches, but I think we all do share a common goal and objective of solving for deforestation and delivering sustainable development at scale. It doesn't get easier, but we are, if you look back, we're making tremendous progress on an increasing pace and clip. So let's just keep leaning in together. Thanks.
Oh, okay. What Mark said. But also I think let's be razor focused on getting these first agreements across the line and building that narrative, building that storytelling, ensuring that it's credible but also building that broader value proposition. And I think that's key. So I'm excited for the next couple of months.
Yeah, so hard to add much other than I think just the kind of the ceasefire of the circular firing squad would be quite helpful. I don't love that phrase, but I just suppose putting it more positively, I think it is a time for a really big conversation about how to make this market work. We've got to stop having this space where it's like, well, shall we have this market? Maybe it'd be nice. I think, we have to be very, very emphatic that it's not whether we're going to have this market, but how we're going to make it work, and be clear that when we're talking about making it work, it has to deliver these co-benefits. And I think kind of part of what Edwina's flagged is the opportunity on that is massive right now, because not only of the development benefits, but also the additional biodiversity benefits. So yeah, really look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you. Yeah, thank you. So thank you, and thank you to this amazing panel, all the reflections that have come through also from the audience. My closing statement or remarks will be that the challenge that we have, or for want of a better phrase, the enemy we have is not with supply side or with demand side. The enemy is with climate change and the rate at which it's happening. And that should be the thinking that we have all the time. And that would help us speed up processes as we have to. It's not about 52-page ERPAs, it's about getting the work done. I'm going to stick to my 52-page ERPAs. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Bueno, ha sido una gran oportunidad compartir con ustedes este panel y con todos los asistentes. A mí me parece que tenemos un reto hacia los próximos meses, de que hagamos un esfuerzo entre pueblos indígenas, comunidades locales, empresas privadas, gobiernos, por construir, digamos, esta pieza que nos falta. Por lo menos eso es lo que nosotros vemos desde las organizaciones, que es el espacio y los recursos para la preparación y que implica que todos estemos hablando el mismo lenguaje y participando en el mismo nivel. Me parece que de eso va a depender en buena parte el éxito de las iniciativas que tengamos tanto a nivel jurisdiccional como a nivel de proyectos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I think I just want to make two comments. One is, from Emergent's perspective, we are learning and adapting. And so we want your feedback. We want to know what we're getting right, what we're not getting right, what we should be doing more of. So feel free to let us know, right? So, and I think we've tried to be very responsive, and we will continue to be. The second is, I think this is a really important year. We're approaching a very important threshold for LEAF, which is to say the first proving out concept with the first supply transactions. And I think that really changes the dynamic. And coming back to Andreas's question, I think one, if you ask some of the corporates, right, there's some in the room, but won't put them on the spot. If you ask them, many of them might be involved with LEAF and might be also investing in projects. And part of that is we don't know, right, what's going to work. We don't know if there's really going to be supply that comes online from LEAF. Once we're able to prove that, I think the conversation really changes. And so this has been the year about proving concept, trying to go from a 53-page ERPA to a 52-page ERPA. But once we get over the line, we'll get there. We'll get down. I don't know if we'll get to 10 pages, but we'll get shorter. But once we can prove a concept, I think moving into next year, it's really about scaling on the supply side, scaling, and then reinvigorating on the demand side. We hope the market and the standard setters cooperate and provide some real guidance, clear, concise, easily communicated guidance, with which sometimes they haven't been the best at. But I think that really changes the game and lets us go from where we are right now to where we need to be to address climate change. I want to thank this panel. It's been an amazing conversation. I want to thank all of you. I mean, we could have probably had any of you on the panel as well. So really appreciate you all being here in the room and active listening and participation. So thanks very much. We'll see you at the reception.